3 minutes past 8 on LBC. It's Iain Dale here with you until 10. Now, in this hour, I want to talk to Mehdi Hasan. If you are a long-time listener of LBC and you can remember back in, 2010, 2011, 2012, Mehdi was a regular voice on LBC. He used to stand in for me when I went on holiday and did rather too good a job, I have to say, because I was always thinking they might prefer to have him permanently. And I published a book that he wrote with James McIntyre on Ed Miliband, but I haven't seen Mehdi for about 10 years, and he's now sitting opposite me. And Mehdi, you haven't changed a bit, if I may say so.
Oh, you're so kind, Ian. You're ignoring the grey hairs in the beard and the hair. It's lovely. I should come hang out with you more often.
Now, you, just before, we'll just talk about you for a minute before we talk about the book, because I just want to set you in context for people who maybe don't know you, because you've been out of the country for, 8 years now?
8 years, yeah.
But you started off in political journalism, Sky News, Channel 4. You then became political editor of The New Statesman, and all sorts of other things.
That's when our paths crossed.
That's when our paths crossed, indeed. And then you made this dramatic move to the United States, and you haven't looked back. Now, why did you make the move?
Oh, short answer was happy wife, happy life. I have an American wife who spent... I wish I could give you some great philosophical, political reason, but my wife spent a decade in the UK, and it was only fair. She said, why don't you come try out the US? But also, there was a career, obviously, incentive, as she keeps reminding me. You didn't just come for me, you came because it was... Look, Ian, you love American politics, as do I. The opportunity to go out and cover the 2016 election, I went out in 2015 thinking Hillary Clinton, thinking everyone thought she would win, was a tantalizing prospect to have a weekly interview show, which is what Al Jazeera English offered me, to interview politicians around the world with their budgets. It was something I really couldn't turn down. In Washington, D.C., a city I'd always been fascinated by. So I thought I'd go do it for a couple of years and ended up not looking back.
See, I'm really jealous of you because I have very few regrets in my career, but one of them is that I've never worked in Washington, which is always my favourite city. It's no, I wouldn't say it is now. I think it's declined a lot. But it had everything I wanted from a capital city. The politics, fantastic restaurants. It's just
but
my ideal.
We British journalists are fascinated by American politics. Yeah. And actually, I think the British public is as well, in a way that we don't cover other politics. It's almost like a kind of extension of domestic politics. And, we've seen since the days of the Beatles, people from the UK go to the US. Can you make it in the US? Whether it's in movies, whether it's in music, whether it's in political journalism. We've seen lots of different people go and have different fates. And so far, I've been blessed in that things are going well. I now work for MSNBC. I have a chance to kind of address an American mainstream audience every week live, get to interview people in the White House and Congress and talk about, I know British politics is crazy right now, but American politics, as you know, was first to the craziness, and it continues. And being at the heart of that is both fascinating and depressing.
Are you still as fascinated by it? Because I have to say, I've slightly fallen out of love with American politics. It's just got too crazy for me, or it certainly did.
Yeah, because
in the Trump
because
years,
the four prime ministers in a year here was much worth you. Come on, I was sitting in the US. Ian, let me just put this in context for you and the audience. I'm sitting in the US with a team of American producers, an American audience, talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene and QAnon and anti-vaxxers and craziness. Oh, America's crazy. And then along comes Britain with its head of lettuce. Like every American knows about the lettuce. You have Prime Minister that can't outlast a lettuce. It was very hard to explain that to viewers in the US, what was going on in the UK. They already knew about Boris Johnson. And then you bring along the rest of the motley crew.
And how do American TV viewers take to you as a Brit? Because, they always, I've had this all over America. Oh, I just love your British accent. But, presenting a political show predominantly about American politics on American television, what are the challenges of that?
So there's opportunities and challenges. As you said, the accent does have an appeal. When I moved to the US, my younger daughter was 8, and a friend of ours said to her, "Don't worry, tomorrow when you go to school, even if you say 2 + 2 is 5, they'll believe you because of the accent. You're fine." So there's that. But then, of course, there's the Piers Morgan precedent. You go and be an anchor in the US, especially a provocative anchor, after Piers Morgan, it's hard. And one producer at a major network once said to me, "We can't hire you because of Piers Morgan." So
he's responsible for an awful lot.
He's responsible for a lot. But, but having said that, I've only been welcomed with open arms. I've never, even from the Republicans who don't like me, even from my right-wing critics, no one's ever gone after my Britishness. No one's gone after the fact that I'm an immigrant. I I am an American citizen. I'm a dual national. I became a citizen shortly before the November 2020 election. So for me, I have skin in the game. When I talk about American democracy being on the line, it's we, it's our, it's my kids growing up there. So I feel like I've actually been really warmly welcomed by people across the political spectrum.
And you are quite provocative. I mean, you were when you were here as well.
Some say.
But I mean, you're quite pugnacious in the way that you present your program. And it's a very fast-moving program, isn't it?
You were on it a few weeks ago talking about your excellent new book.
It went a little bit too quickly for my liking.
That's cable. That's definitely cable. There's no hour of chat. It is very fast-paced and frenetic. And my style is even more provocative there than it was here, because at least here, Iain, the style of interview that I do is familiar with people who have watched Jeremy Paxman or John Humphreys or Andrew Neil or whatever it is. In the US, it's much rarer, and people always bring that up to me and they say, "Oh, you're very different to it." The question I get asked most on this book tour that I've been doing in the US, the question I get asked most is, what do you see as the differences between the UK and US media? How come your style is different? And I've said for a while that the US media, I said before I even moved to the US, that the US media needed a Paxman being parachuted in to shake things up. I didn't know it would be me. But, some of my interviews have shaken things up there. And the interview I did with Eric Prince here in England, actually, was what got me a lot of prominence in the US. So Eric Prince is the guy who founded the Blackwater mercenary company that worked in Iraq and was accused of war crimes and all sorts of corruption. He's a big Trump supporter and Trump donor. And I interviewed him and grilled him in a way about congressional testimony that led to him being referred to the DOJ. And it became a big thing. It was a big viral thing. I interviewed people like John Bolton on my show and asked him questions about Iraq there. He'd never really been asked by American interviewers before.
He's an interesting one to interview, isn't he?
Especially because he's actually a very smart guy, as much as I loathe his politics. Very good debater, but he had never been asked just to... You know what I asked him here? I just said to him, forget about the rights and wrongs of, WMDs. Or does it not weigh on your conscience that all those people died and you're responsible for that? And he was furious. But no one had ever... I think it's a totally fair question, reasonable question. But in the US media, they don't really ask questions like that.
Do you ever, when you're interviewing people and asking questions like that, do you ever sort of slightly get nervous about asking such direct questions, worried what the reaction might be, worried that they might walk out?
Yes, and a couple of people have kind of walked out, but not really walked out. I never really had to pull off the microphone, walk out. I interviewed Vitaly Klitschko, and I talk about it in the book, former heavyweight champion of the world, now mayor of Kyiv, helping his city stand up to Russian invaders. 6'10". His arms are bigger than my entire body. I interviewed him in the studio in DC, and he said to me, I'm not going to do the accent because he'll end up like Ivan Drago, but he said, speak slowly. My English is not so good. So I speak very fast, as you may have noticed already, and I tried to slow myself down like a British tourist in Rome. Where is the Colosseum? That kind of pace. And I then started getting faster and faster. And then I asked him about accusations that he's worked with the Ukrainian mafia. He didn't like that. No. Didn't like that at all. Interview ended. He towered above me. You said you would speak slowly. You asked me all these questions. I thought, is he going to hit me? And if he hits me, am I going to die? And is it going to go viral? Those are the weird thoughts in my weird head in that moment. So, I've had some moments where people, it's very, very awkward when the interview's over.
Because you talk about the sort of, I'm not going to say aggressive, but sort of pugnacious interviewing style, which I think in this country...
Challenging.
Well, I think in this country, it's dying out. In that there aren't actually many interviewers who adopt that style. And I don't know what the reason for that is necessarily. It's not just because Jeremy Paxman has retired. I mean, there were plenty of others who used to adopt a similar style, but now it seems to be a little bit more gently, and people seem to think, well, you get more out of people like that.
That was always the case. There was always a school of thought that said David Frost lulls people on a Sunday morning into a kind of friend zone where he gets them to trip up and say things. And that's perfectly respectable. And in some cases that works. But in other cases, your John Boltons are not lulled into saying things they don't want to say. Those are the kind of people you've got to get combative with. And I think I am from the school of thought that says, Rob Burley, formerly of this parish, now at Sky, former boss of mine at ITV on the Dimbleby show, and he's got a book coming out with the Jeremy Paxman quote is the title, Why is this lying bastard lying to me? And, while you don't have to go in with that mindset, I do think you have to start with the I'm not just going to, especially in American politics right now, Ian, you have one political party that's been taken over by gaslighters, grifters, serial fabricators, led by a guy who lies every time he breathes. And therefore, there's no kind of casual chat with such figures. There's no lulling them into. You have to really challenge them. By the time you've challenged line number 4, they're on line number 17. And I have a chapter in the book about how do you deal with someone like that who just tries to steamroll you with misinformation and BS.
Well, we'll talk about that in a second. But when do you find it difficult to get people on the right to come onto your show?
Yes. I think all CNN, MSNBC hosts in most of the mainstream, whatever you want to call it, MSM, liberal media, do struggle right now, mainly because the right have this safe space that they can retreat to. They can go on Fox for softballs, as we're seeing with the big Fox legal case that's going on right now. We know that Fox hosts... That is basically an extension of the Republican Party. You can go on a channel called Newsmax, which is even more bonkers than Fox. And you can go on a channel called OANN, which is even more bonkers than Newsmax. So they have these safe spaces. Why go on the Sunday shows that they traditionally went on?
But that works both ways, doesn't it? Because the sort of more liberal politicians, presumably they don't go on those channels.
Well, that's not true, actually. A lot of Democrats still do go on Fox. I don't think they do, but I don't think they should. But Bernie Sanders goes on Fox. Pete Buttigieg goes on Fox. And also, I don't accept the equivalence between the liberal channels and the conservative channels, because while my channel, clearly I have a bias, I have an opinion show, but we still adhere to basic journalistic standards. We're not, for those of your listeners who are not aware, Rupert Murdoch's deposition and emails released recently, the owner of Fox, he was giving debate strategy and secret Democratic Party ads to the Republican Party, to Jared Kushner and Trump. If you and I did that, Ian, our heads would roll from a normal journalistic enterprise, but Fox is not a normal journalistic enterprise, excuse me.
Now, this book, people have written books about how to improve their public speaking, debating, and whatever, but they tend to be rather theoretical.
Yes.
What I love about your book is that you're putting in the practice here, your experience of how you win debates. And you say, let me see if I can find it. It's somewhere near the beginning of the book. I prefer not to avoid arguments. I seek them out, rush towards them, relish and savour them. And you always want to win, don't you?
I think we all do. Who goes into argument wanting to lose?
Well, I think no one wants to lose, but I think most normal people think that they are probably going to lose the odd. I mean, I know.
Oh, well, come on, I lose the odd argument too.
In a 3-hour programme, and I'm debating with listeners all the time, there are 1 or 2 listeners that will sometimes get the better of me.
So let me clarify, because some people have said to me about the title. Some people made a philosophical point. Why would you want to win every argument? You should be able to open your mind and see where you're wrong. And I don't dispute that. But I'm saying... this is not about saying you should win every argument. This is saying if you want to win every argument, let me give you the tools. And there are a lot of people who are in positions where it's not a choice. If I'm a prosecutor trying to put a murderer behind bars and convince a jury of 12, I'm not trying to find out the murderer's point of view and meet some great middle ground. I need to make the case and convince a bunch of strangers. If you're in a job interview, which I would argue is a form of argument, you're making a case, you want to get the job. So these are skills that people in different walks of life need. I say in the book, everyone at some point in their life wants to win an argument, needs to win an argument, has to win an argument. And the premise of the book is everyone can win an argument. It's not just you as an LBC broadcaster or me as an MSNBC host. People think, that's them. There's TV people, the public, I'm not that person. No, everyone. And I don't just give examples from my life in the book. I talk about Winston Churchill. I talk about the great Greek philosopher Demosthenes, people who were awful public speakers, awful at debate, but they improved over time. They put in the hours. They acquired the skills. They were, they were goal oriented, and they did it. And they become the legends that we know them today. But they didn't start out that way.
That's a really interesting point, because I think a lot of people believe that, well, if you're a bad public speaker, you can never improve. And I mean, there are plenty of politicians who we could cite as evidence for that, probably,
including Thatcher, famously.
Absolutely, but it is possible to improve. And I mean, using my own experience, I mean, I could always deliver a speech, and I could quite happily deliver a written speech with a typed text and do it where people didn't really know that I'd got a written speech. But having done it for so long now, I'm quite happy to stand up in front of an audience and deliver a 20-minute speech without any notes at all, which I couldn't have done 10 years ago. And it's actually doing this program that's helped me do that.
And you've done it via the Malcolm Gladwell approach, which is, 10,000 hours is genius. You've put in the time. And I say in the book, one of the most difficult chapters to write, because it's kind of, some people might say worthy but dull, is practice, preparation. But there's no real mystery to this stuff. Actually, like every other walk of life, if you want to excel, you've got to put in the time, you've got to put in the effort, you've got to do the self-improvement. And that's why I give the examples of people who did it. And you give the example of like standing up. A lot of people don't want to stand up because they're scared, right? There's a whole chapter in the book on confidence. What is the most important attribute of a speaker? It's having the confidence. There's a poll in the US that the biggest fear of any American is giving a speech in front of a group of people. Number 2 on the list is dying. Right? Number 1 is public speaking. Number 2 is dying. So Jerry Seinfeld has a line. He says that means that if you're at a funeral, you'd rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy. That's how much people are afraid of public speaking. So I say that's a legitimate fear. We've all had it in some point or another. I've had it. You've had it. How do you overcome it? How do you work on confidence? How do you move from the gathering of 5 to the gathering of 500 to the gathering of 5 million on a live TV audience?
And you did that because, you grew up in Swindon. You had a good education, and then you went to Oxford and immediately took part in debates of the Oxford Union, which I would have been, I can't use the phrase that I was about to use, but you know what I mean. I would, and every time I get an invitation to go and speak at Oxford, I always turn it down.
No.
I do. I've still got that slight inferiority complex.
No, you've got to do you got Oxford Union people, if you're listening, put a request now to Iain.
Luckily, it means I'd have to take a day off LBC, and I can't afford to do that.
You can do that.
Anyway, we're going to talk much more about the book and American politics in a moment. And after past, Mehdi will be taking your calls. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. It's 18 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
Mehdi Hasan is with us. He'll be taking your call shortly. 0345 6060 973. He's written this book called Win Every Argument, The Art of Debating, Persuading and Public Speaking. Mehdi, is part of the way to win an argument to make a conscious effort to understand the opposite argument, to try and understand the motivation of the person that you're debating with? Because I always think if you don't even think they have a right to a point of view, even though you may vehemently disagree with it, how can you debate properly with them?
110%. And I start the book, I end the book talking about John Stuart Mill. His famous work on liberty, he talks about you cannot know your own side of the argument unless you know the other side of the argument and the most plausible version of the other side of the argument. Sometimes we think we understand what the other person's saying, but really we're straw-manning them. We're kind of giving them the dumbest, silliest reasons for what they believe so that we can knock it down. I say in the book, you need to steel man the other person's argument. You need to come up with the best version of their argument and be ready for that one. It'll help you win. It's just a more intellectually honest exercise. I always say that I prefer to know the other person's argument better than they do. That's when I prepare for an interview. I want to know what John Bolton or whoever it is in front of me is going to say before they say it. That's how much research I want to have done.
So I think one of the most important chapters is chapter 6, Make Them Laugh, because to my mind, if you go on a television program or you're on the radio and you smile a lot and you make people laugh, they think, oh, that's a nice person. And you're halfway there to winning the argument. If somebody likes you, if they can laugh at you or with you, preferably with you rather than at you. You are halfway there, aren't you? Yeah,
and this goes back to ancient Greeks, ancient Romans. I talk about Cicero, who was known for his sense of humor. I quote good old John Cleese in the book, who says exactly what you just said, which is if I can make people laugh, they like me, they're more likely to agree with me. So, yes, and me personally, Ian, because I have such a combative style, people assume that I'm just a very serious, angry, intense person. I also have what I call in the book RAMF. I have resting angry Muslim face. So when I'm paying attention very seriously, it looks like I'm going to bite someone's head off. And there's a lot of prejudices that come with being someone like me. So I have to consciously. Well, I remember I used to be a producer for Eamon Holmes on Sky Sunrise. And he used to say to me, he goes, you got to smile more. You got to smile more. And he's right. 100%. You have to do that because that is the body language. I talk in the book about eye contact, body language, how you come across. People aren't going to be persuaded because of some argument you put forward. They're going to be persuaded by you. They want to bond with you, not just with your argument. And humor is a great way of bonding. It's social glue.
You've got a chapter called Beware of the Gish Galloper. And it's predominantly about Donald Trump and the way that he seeks to win an argument. And it's actually quite worrying when you read this chapter in a way, because it's not just Donald Trump. I mean, there are plenty of people who adopt the same tactics as he does. Just explain your theory in this.
So the Gish Gallop is a phrase that comes from some debate circles. I'm sure Donald Trump doesn't even know it exists, but he does it, unwittingly perhaps. But it comes from a guy called Duane Gish, who was a creationist who used to debate evolution with scientists back in the 90s. He's passed away. And he used to do it by steamrolling them with cherry-picked quotes, out-of-context statistics, lies, half-truth, and do it really fast. So throw 30 of them at you in 60 seconds, and the scientist doesn't know where to begin responding, and the audience thinks, maybe he's got a point. The scientist didn't rebut everything he just said. It's about throwing as much at you and see what sticks. Well, Steve Bannon, a Trump advisor, famously said, you flood the zone with excrement. He used another word. You flood the zone and you're disoriented. And you know this. You've seen interviews with Trump debates. The fact checker, the host is trying to rebut lie 4. Trump's on lie 17. You can't keep up. And it's a very effective, if cynical, strategy. So in the book, I say, look, there's 3 things you can do as a journalist or a politician who's up against a Trumpy figure. Number 1, pick your battle. Don't try and rebut everything. Number 2, don't budge. You know this. Follow-up questions are so vital. Politicians want you to move on to the next thing. No, don't budge till they've answered your question. And number 3, call it out. I mean, this whole strategy, this whole BS strategy, America is filled with people trying to gaslight us right now. Britain, to some extent, seems to be following in many ways. Those of us in the media who are trying to get answers, we've got to call this stuff out and not accept it as the new norm.
I should have said at the beginning of the hour, you can watch us on Global Player, so you can see Mehdi's, what was it, resting angry Muslim face. So you can say that. I can't. Although I just did, didn't I?
You should see me playing board games.
No, that is not something I'd ever want to do with you, I have to say.
I'll win.
Now, listen, before we start taking calls, let's talk about the next 18 months in US politics, because it could be that we have a British general election and an American presidential election in the same week. I mean, how fun would that be? It's possible. Now, at the moment, everyone seems to assume that Joe Biden is going to stand again, although apparently somebody was telling me in Washington last week that George W. Bush thinks he won't stand again. Now, I mean, that is a scenario.
Why is George W. Bush a source on whether Joe Biden runs again?
He's an ex-president. He knows these things, doesn't he? I don't know.
George W. Bush is not known for knowing much. No, I'm joking. No, I think he's running. His wife has made it clear he's running. He's made it clear he's running. The Democratic Party have made it clear he's running because there's no challenger.
I made a new friend last week, by the way, Valerie Biden, his sister.
Oh, yes, I saw a photo.
Yeah,
there you go. There's
yeah,
your in with the president. When's your dinner with the president?
All over me, she was.
When are you going to be at the Oval Office?
Well, who knows?
He's going to run again, which should be controversial because he will be the oldest president ever to run for re-election. He'll be the oldest person to ever sit in the Oval Office. He'll be 85, 6 at the end of a second term, which is kind of crazy. But interestingly, the Democratic Party is known for division. The famous meme headline in the US is Dems in disarray. They're always divided. But this time around, no. The Democrats are completely united behind Biden. Bernie Sanders, his chief rival from 2020, said, I'm not going to run again if Joe runs again. The polling is mixed, but it's the Republicans who are divided. Once again, Trump is running again for a third time. And they all say this, all the Republicans say this, Ian. You could only beat him if it's one-on-one. Don't give him multiple candidates. That's how he won in 2016. And guess what? There are multiple candidates again. They're not all coalescing around one stop Trump candidate. You've got Nikki Haley running. You've got Mike Pompeo and Mike Pence about to declare. And of course, Ron DeSantis, who is seen as the only person who can beat Trump. I think Trump will wipe the floor with all of them, personally.
So that they are about to declare, because I think that displays a huge amount of lack of self-knowledge. That they don't stand a chance.
Of course.
So why would they do this?
Mike Pence wants to run for president. A reminder: people from his own party chanted, "Hang Mike Pence" on January the 6th. What lane is he running in? The non-hang Mike Pence lane. Like, I have more chance of being the Republican presidential candidate in 2024 than Mike Pence does. But the ego of politicians.
Now, that's a bit of hyperbole for you.
You know more politicians than I do, and I think the ego of these people is crazy. I mean, Nikki Haley is polling at 3%, 6%. Good luck to her. She doubles it to 12. I mean, first of all, Trump hasn't unloaded on these people, and I have a chapter in the book about ad hominem attacks, and he's the master of ad hominem attacks. We can all say...
And you rather approve of them?
I don't approve of his. I approve of the idea of challenging the credibility of your opponent, calling them out by name and not just going after the argument. That goes back to Aristotle and the idea of somebody's personal credibility being vital to an argument.
So... Trump is almost certainly going to... I mean, he has announced that he's
running. But, and even if he's indicted, he can run. In fact, he can even run from a prison cell. Not that he'll be in a prison cell.
Can he really? Because you couldn't do that in this country.
But he won't be in a prison cell because there's no indictment, and even if there's indictment, a trial would take years. So he's running. There's nothing going to stop him from running, and the issue is, can the Republicans stop him? If it's Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, what a weird rematch that will be. I think Joe Biden would fancy his chances.
But it's going to be so ugly, isn't it?
It's going to be ugly regardless.
However ugly we think our politics
American
is at the moment.
American politics is hugely divided in a way that British politics, no other country in the Western world.
But is there part of you
there's a hatred. There's a hatred.
Are you excited by it, or is there part of you that dreads it?
No, I'm not excited by it anymore. I dread it. I was the guy, Ian, in 2019 and 2020 saying, this is going to be a car crash. He's not going to go quietly. He's not going to leave. And people said, the Brit, you don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. Oh, don't be silly. Calm down. It's hyperbole. Secret Service will walk him out. I told everyone there'll be riots. There'll be a mob. He won't go quietly. It's not in his nature. What do you think is going to happen in 2024? It's going to be horrible. The threat of violence that exists in the US, sadly, of political violence, there's no mirror for that in the UK or France or anywhere else. And the number of guns.
People are even talking about some sort of revolution, which...
Civil war discourse has become very popular on the right. And I interviewed a historian of civil wars recently on my show, Barbara Walter, who's a former consultant with the CIA. She said, having studied 200 years of American history, having studied multiple foreign conflicts, she said that America, she believes, is closer to a civil war than at any time she can think of since 1865. That is scary.
But who would it be between? That's because it's not actually easy to divide.
It wouldn't be a civil war like a battlefield. But when you talk about civil war, you mean civil conflict in terms of like low-level insurgency, violence. What we're already seeing in America, sadly, domestic terror at record levels from white supremacists, attacks on government buildings, on public spaces, assassination attempts, stuff that we're already kind of seeing, but in a much more escalated fashion. That is the nightmare route. And the only way you stop that is if the right in America call it out. But unfortunately, too many people on the right in America have just acquiesced with it, or have kept quiet out of fear.
Do you think moderate Republicans have effectively just given up the ghost? They can't stand it anymore, and they've just decided we can't be part of this.
Yes,
and so they're not standing up because they don't want to be targets themselves.
Very much so. We've had members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, have gone on TV and said, I received death threats for voting for Joe Biden's bipartisan infrastructure package. He voted for a bridge He got death threats, right? This is crazy. They're quitting Congress. They're resigning from, their jobs. They're going quietly, leaving public life because there's no space for them in the Trump party, which is a very aggressive, very violent, very paranoid party. So I think they have given up. And even the people who tried to, Kevin McCarthy, who's the Speaker of the House, on January the 6th, after January 6th, he calls out Trump. He says Trump's to blame for all this. A few weeks later, he turns up at Mar-a-Lago to kiss the ring. And since then, he's been completely a Trump lackey. So unfortunately, there is no spine in that party.
Well, if you'd like to talk to Mehdi, he's going to be with us until 9 o'clock. You can ask him about his book, Win Every Argument, or anything about US politics, or maybe what he misses about this country. And don't say Marmite.
Dairy milk.
Yeah, American chocolate. Oh,
no, I bring all my dairy milk back.
8:32 is the time on LBC. Let's get the latest news headlines from Daryl Jackson.
Labour says the announcement of delays to the HS2 train line shows Northern England's yet again being asked to pay the price for staggering Conservative failure. The Birmingham to Crewe leg is being delayed by 2 years. Forecasters are predicting North West Wales and Northern England will see the worst of the wintry weather again overnight. Amber weather warnings are in place with up to 40 centimetres of snow possible in some places. And some supermarkets have begun to lift limits on buying certain fresh fruit and vegetables as supply issues begin to ease, but that doesn't apply to tomatoes and peppers yet. LBC weather, persistent snow for southern Scotland and Northern Ireland overnight. Blizzard conditions for northern England with wet weather across southern England and Wales, a low of -7.
This is LBC.
On LBC, Mehdi Hasan is with us, the author of Win Every Argument. You can phone in and ask about the book or American politics. Let's bowl a soft one at you first, Mehdi. It's a tweet from Mahbub who says, does your book give tips on how to win an argument with your wife?
I knew I could have finished that question before you asked it. It's a classic question, especially from men, since the book came out. Will this help me win an argument with my wife? And I would say check out the dedication page of the book right there at the front. Ian's opening it and see what I wrote right there. Next one. There you go.
To my wife, the love of my life and the only person I can never seem to win an argument with. So bad luck.
So yeah, I would say use this book in all walks of life, but my free advice would be probably don't use it with your spouse or partner.
Right, let's get serious. David is in Uxbridge. Hello, David.
Yeah, hi Ian and hi Mehdi. I'd like to ask Mehdi what he thinks about the kind of links between basically, mainly on foreign policy, but the Pentagon, the US government and the corporate media, because it seems to me that they cover certain stories and really don't cover other. I was thinking of the Seymour Hersh one, like Nord Stream 2, and all this sort of Cold War rhetoric, like with China, the way they cover the war in Ukraine. And it kind of mirrors really what I see the Pentagon, the US government, and the British media do the same. So there's no people like holding power to account, really. It's like what Chomsky says, you get a very narrow debate and it's lively in between very narrow parameters.
Yes.
And what does Mehdi think about that for, because it has huge implications for the world if we get into a Cold War with China and we're not solving the real problems like climate change, So I'd listen to Mehdi. Okay. How does he work within the corporate media? And does he agree with that analysis?
It's a great question, and I'm someone who comes from the left side of the political spectrum, has had a lot of critiques of corporate media. Now I work for NBC, which is owned by Comcast, so people do ask me that question. And look, I haven't held back in my criticisms of US media practices that I don't like, and I do think too many within the media are too close to centers of power, including, as you say, the Pentagon. I think the US media and the UK media should be far more critical and pay far more attention to what goes on abroad in our name. This month we're about to mark the 20th anniversary of the Iraq invasion, the illegal, brutal, disastrous Iraq invasion. And yes, if the British and American media, mainstream media, had held Bush and Blair to account in a better way, had asked better questions, had scrutinized the WMD claims and dossiers better, a lot more Iraqis would still be alive today, in my view. So I think you're right to point out that there's sometimes too much closeness. I don't think that means that there's no holding of power to account. I would like to think that I still try in my own little corner of the corporate media. The Seymour Hersh piece is interesting. I've interviewed Seymour Hersh a few times. I've also interviewed Noam Chomsky a few times. And I would say Hersh sadly isn't the reporter that he once was. And that Nord Stream piece, he published it on his Substack. He used to write for The New Yorker. A lot of people have challenged a lot of the facts in that piece, the sourcing of that piece. So I think there's good reasons why it hasn't had the same coverage as some of his earlier journalism. But you're right on the bigger point. We just need to hold power to account better, especially, as you say, kind of military industrial complex. The prospects of a nuclear war with either Russia or China are too disastrous to even contemplate.
I think what also lies behind David's question is that there is this innate suspicion amongst people, and I think particularly who may be on the left of politics, that you and I are somehow doing our master's bidding all the time, that every day I get my marching orders as to what subjects to cover, what my editorial position should be, and I'm sure there are lots of people who suspect that's the same for you. Now, I can look anyone in the eye and say that in 13 years, on not a single occasion, has anyone instructed me what I should be covering or what I should be saying. But I might as well talk to a brick wall, because if people who believe this sort of thing, whatever you say, that they would just think you're lying.
So I would say I'm going to agree with you halfway. I'm going to say I agree with you. I'm sure nobody has told you that and nobody's told me. But I would say there's almost like three groups. there's three things to consider. One is the people who do take marching orders. There are people in our industry, and I mentioned Fox earlier, where literally Rupert Murdoch is saying, tell those people to get behind. And that is happening in some parts of the media. That's one extreme position. There's another position where you and I are saying, look, we're going to do what we want to do. We've reached positions in our career where we're able to push back if somebody tries to tell us what to say, and I would quit tomorrow if somebody told me you must say this in your opening monologue. But then I think there's a third point, which I think is a fair point that people like us may dismiss too quickly, which is there is a consensus that forms too quickly on a lot of issues in our industry. You know that, and I know that. I'm sure you've criticised many liberal media consensus positions, whether it was on the EU or whatever it is, where people do think alike. There's a groupthink mentality. And I think that's what we really need to be conscious of. Are we focusing too narrowly on a certain group? Are we getting enough voices? A diversity of opinion, a spectrum of opinion? Are we shutting down too many debates that we really should be having? I think those are very legitimate questions to ask, for the public to ask and for us to ask ourselves.
And I guess there was a lot of that during the pandemic, wasn't there? Where, we were criticised, I was criticised for not giving enough voice to the sort of anti-vax. Well, in fact, I didn't give any voice to the anti-vaxxers, and I make no apology for that whatsoever. I would do it all over again. Good. But even now, every day on Twitter, people are saying, "Oh, aren't you going to apologise for some of your views on lockdown?"
Well,
no,
lockdown, masks, lab
No.
leak. There's been a lot of rewriting of history. I just did my show in America this week on the whole lab leak debate that people think was suppressed. Look, I say in the book, we talk about arguing, Ian. You got to argue in good faith. My worry is that a lot of what people define as argument today is in bad faith. I'm not going to, Marjorie Taylor Greene is a very prominent Republican congresswoman. I give her as my example everywhere I go. If she wanted to come on my show tomorrow, Ian, I wouldn't have her on, even though it would get massive ratings and virality, because I'm not going to debate with someone who doesn't believe half the stuff they say, is just performing for a base. I'm not going to argue up is down, black is white, hot is cold. I'm not going to argue the Holocaust did or didn't happen. I'm not going to argue climate change is real or not. I'm not going to argue whether Joe Biden won the election. There's certain, I have hygiene tests when it comes to what I want to debate on my show. So yeah, I'm not going to argue. I'm not going to have a debate about vaccines. I'm not going to. That's the thing. There's certain things you can't debate because reality matters, truth matters.
David,
Sorry.
thank you for that. Let's
Sorry
go
to be
to
a party
Tim
pooper.
in Richmond. Hello, Tim.
Yeah, hi both. I hope you're well. A big fan of you both.
Thank
But
you.
I just wanted to challenge Mehdi's
There's someone with
assertion
an
that
open mind.
I just wanted to challenge Mehdi's assertion that Fox News was fake news, which I do agree with, but that liberal media, CSN, MSNBC, people like Don Lemon and Brian Stelter are somehow bastions of truth.
I didn't say that, but...
Well, alluding to the fact that liberal media was more truthful in a way than Fox News. And I agree that they're perhaps not on the same scale, but I don't see how people like Don Lemon, Brian Stelter aren't the other side of the same coin to people like Tucker Carlson, and that all they do is to serve polarising the country even further.
Because I enjoy a good argument and you've challenged me, let me respectfully challenge you back. So Tucker Carlson says in private, as we learned this week, I hate Donald Trump with a passion. He's a demonic force. He'll destroy everything he touches. In public on his show, he says Trump's got a bold vision. The election was stolen, etc., etc. Can you give me an example from Brian Stelter or Don Lemon doing anything similar to that at CNN?
No, I couldn't give an example of anything similar or anything as serious as that. But there are plenty of examples of where I think they have been disingenuous with the truth, for example, and you only have to look at...
I agree with you. I mean, if you're going to tell me, I'm not going to say all journalists tell the truth. I just said a moment ago, you heard me say to Ian that the Iraq war was a great media failure. A lot of journalists acted as vessels for a lot of lies from people in power. I'm not defending my industry blindly or journalists. I'm saying if we make if I get something wrong at MSNBC, we have to correct it. If I'm touching on a contentious issue, I have to send the script to a legal department to check we're not defaming anyone. If I do something outrageous, I'll get fired. That doesn't apply to Fox. They don't have the same journalistic standards. That's my point. Not that the rest of us are all bastions of truth. No, we're all human.
Perhaps you're right. I just can't help but feel that on a surface level, more people like yourself, more prominent people calling out misinformation, even if it's not at the same scale on both sides, can only help to bring America and hopefully together more, as opposed to push people to either side.
I agree. We all need to do better. The media needs to be self-reflective, admit what it gets wrong. But that's from within the same industry. And I'm saying I don't even consider Fox to be in the same industry. I consider it to be a propaganda arm of the Republican Party. And as I say, don't take my view. Read Rupert Murdoch's emails and texts. Read Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity's texts. Just for your listeners, just give me one example. One Fox host says to another Fox host, that reporter who said Biden won, how dare she? She should get fired. This is what they're saying to each other on air. Iain Dale would never text an LBC colleague saying that. I would never text an NBC colleague saying that.
No, this wasn't a defense of this wasn't a defense of Fox.
No, I understand. No, I get the point you're making. I half agree, half disagree.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Tim. Nikki says, Mehdi, for me, James O'Brien is the best debater and broadcaster and has a verbal dexterity which is second to none. What do you think of his style?
Well, that's funny because James O'Brien and I just pre-taped a podcast this morning and he said I was a better debater than him. No, I'm joking. It was, he may have said something similar in very nice words. No, James is brilliant. He also wrote a book called How to Be Right before I wrote a book called Win Every Argument. So we're on similar terrain there. I think our political views are pretty similar as well. What I enjoy about James is that he's one of those people who speaks without umming and ahhing, which I can't do. So I'm always in admiration of people who just speak fluently without a kind of break.
And you think you don't do that?
No, I don't.
You're delusional.
I don't. I wish I did that. You do that. You do.
No,
I've just been listening to you. See, you have this. There's a radio host skill that I don't. I did used to sit in for you a decade ago, and I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed taking calls from LBC listeners. But what you and James and others have, who are kind of masterful radio broadcasters, is that ability to just. I think smoothness is the word I'm going to use.
We do pause for breath occasionally.
Do you? Just
Yeah,
occasionally?
Yeah, unlike you. It's 8:46.
Iain Dale on LBC.
On LBC, Mehdi Hasan's here talking about Win Every Argument. That's his book. It's been, when was it published? Last week, wasn't it?
Published last week.
Yeah, so it's doing well in the Amazon charts, I see. After this programme, it's going to climb a few places.
Before I got on a plane to come here, I was told that it's now officially a New York Times bestseller.
Well, it doesn't get better than that.
It doesn't.
Right, let's go to Mohammed, who's in Walsall. Hello, Mohammed.
Yeah, hi, Mehdi.
Hello.
One main question and a little bit of a follow-on after that. What do you think the chances of a non-Trump Republican presidential candidate in 2024 is? We've seen Nikki Haley put her hat in the ring, Ron DeSantis, or Ron DeSanctimonious. They're up there as well. And the follow-on from that is a slightly more broader point, which is that why is it, in your opinion, from now having been in America, that the shall we say, the more believing Christians, if we want to put it that way, are more on the right, while over in this country they seem to be more upon the left?
Interesting. So let's just take those backwards. I think I don't buy the idea that kind of Christians are all on the right. I think what you have is a very loud segment of the Christian population in America, white Protestant evangelicals, who have become, some might say, to use a phrase often used about my community, Muslims, radicalized in a way, very politically radicalized, very angry. And I interviewed a Protestant leader who said, the problem with the issue with white evangelicals is less to do with the evangelical part and more to do with the white part. It's a race debate once again, because actually black evangelicals, Latino evangelicals don't vote for Republicans. So I think it's a little bit more complicated than sometimes the kind of headlines do about, the Christian support. Has the Democratic Party done enough to be a welcoming place for people of faith? Probably not. I think centre-left parties, secular centre-left parties, do have an issue with people of faith. But to go back to your wider point, I think there's look, I don't do predictions anymore. In 2016, I predicted Trump wouldn't win and Brexit wouldn't happen. I was wrong on both, so I've tried to stop doing political predictions. But there's a good chance it might not be Trump. But if a gun was held to my head, I would say Trump is still the favourite, because all these other candidates, they don't have the backbone to go up against him. Once he starts unloading on... Ron DeSantis has a glass jaw. He's deeply overrated. He's been stuck in Florida's little mini fiefdom on a national stage. I think a lot of his own supporters worry that he will wilt under the debate national lights, especially when Trump starts going off on him. Has he got the fight to fight? But they didn't in 2016. You remember Ted Cruz? He was going to be the guy who stops Trump. Trump suggested Cruz's wife was ugly. He suggested Cruz's father killed JFK. And Cruz went to phone bank and campaigned for him afterwards.
Yeah, and he even, was supporting, the coup, the insurrection, or whatever we want to call it, when he was in the building that was getting firebombed.
Indeed.
And so it's, my question about why I was saying about the faith aspect was, it seems that Donald Trump has a hold on that Christian right.
Which is so weird, because he's the most un-Christian man I've ever come across in my life. A twice divorcee, accused adulterer, failed casino owner, a man who lies in every breath, who couldn't identify a verse of the Bible if his life depended on it. And he's the guy who's become this hero for some on the Christian right. It is truly bizarre.
Mohammed, thank you very much. Right, Mark in Sevenoaks. Mark, you're going to provoke me, aren't you? What's your question?
Yes,
I know what your question is, but go on.
You know what it is. Yes,
I don't.
I'm sure you do.
I'm fascinated.
The majority of people, vast majority of people in this country are against Brexit now, and the majority want to rejoin the EU, accepting the invitation to hold a second referendum on the final deal, provided in EU law. Yet, all of the major political parties and most political commentators seem to be just dismissing this. I was wondering if you could give me some advice as to how I could do something about it, basically.
Well, it's not just commentators who dismiss it. All the political parties are doing it, even those that you would describe as pro-European.
Yes, that's right.
So,
that's right. Despite the fact that we've got this law, EP 2020/2136, Section 30, which is an invitation to hold a second referendum on the final deal.
Well, here's my advice to you. Here's my first bit of advice based on my book. If you're going to convince people, don't cite obscure laws and long numbers, because people will switch off. As I say in the book, the human brain is not designed to absorb statistics and lots of obscure facts and figures. You want to win people over, you've got to engage with their hearts, not just their heads, is what I say in the book. So if you want to start the campaign to get Britain back in the EU and overturn Brexit, one of the main reasons Brexit happened, one of the main reasons Trump happened, is because people were angry. That anger was, in my view, not Iain Dale's view, channeled in the wrong direction. It was exploited and weaponized and politicized. And if you're going to get people back on your side, you've got to get people's emotions on board. You've got to approach people as emotional creatures, not logical creatures. You can't just do cost-benefit analysis about free trade agreements. That bores people to death, and it's not going to get anyone inspired. You have to make an inspiring, uplifting case that rouses people as to why we should be back in the European Union.
In short, you have to win hearts and minds. You can come up with all the facts that you like, but if you don't win people's hearts and minds, you're never going to win a campaign. And that, I think, is where the Remain campaign went wrong.
100%.
They couldn't show the sunny uplands, could
100%. And I say this in the second chapter of my book, is said, feelings, not just facts. The human brain doesn't just operate on its own. All of the science shows that we feel our way towards a decision rather than think our way towards a decision. So if you want to appeal to people, appeal to people's feelings.
Mark, thank you. Terry's in Livingston in Scotland. Hello, Terry.
Hi there, Ian.
Hi. What would you like to ask?
Hi there, Mehdi. Great to speak to you. I'm a big fan. I watch MSNBC from Scotland.
Oh, thank you.
I've been saying to some of my friends over the last little while that I think that the British Conservative Party isn't really a political party. I think that what it is the establishment and the class system in power. What do you think of that contention?
I think it's got some truth to it. I mean, it fundamentally is a political party. We can't just pretend it's not. But I think what you're talking about is what it represents. If you look at the Boris Johnson and David Camerons of this world, I can see the argument for that. And, right-wing parties around the world, Iain will disagree with me, have always been about upholding property and privilege and power and wealth. And that hasn't really changed when you look at the tax policies of right-wing parties. One thing, look at the Republican Party in the US where I am. It's gone completely off the rails on pretty much most issues, except for one where it's just still consistently, wholeheartedly cut taxes on the rich, cut taxes on. It's the one thing Trump pulled off. It's literally the only major piece of legislation he got through, his tax cut. So I think you're right in that sense. People say, don't talk about class warfare as if it's the working class pushing the class warfare. No, it's always been the 0.1%ers pushing the class war.
Can I follow that up quickly? So Iain would support the idea that a rich man gives £50,000 or more to the Conservative Party, a person. They get invited to special lunches where no minutes are ever kept, and the government ministers are in attendance. Isn't that corrupt?
Well, you say I support that. I mean, no.
To be fair, both to Iain Dale and the Conservative Party, the problem with that is that's across the board, my friend. That is all political parties, unfortunately.
I'll just say one sentence on this because I want to hear your answer. But if you don't have state funding of political parties, all political parties have to raise money, and part of that is raising money from rich people. Labour do it. I mean, David Sainsbury has just given £2 million to Labour.
I don't like that from any party. And I was going to say to Terry, to be fair, I'm going to have to go take a shower after this. To be fair to the Conservative Party, it's not just the Conservative Party that engages in these practices that do look corrupt. They may not be corrupt, but they look corrupt. They do disillusion people. They do make people not trust the political system. Things happening behind closed doors. And the rich people are rewarded by whichever party's in power. Tony Blair gave rich people favours too.
Terry, thank you for that. Let's go to a quick final question from Ozzy in Hendon. Ozzy, go ahead.
Hi there, Iain. Welcome back to the Isles, Mehdi. Lovely to speak with you. My question is also about accountability. So I've been watching you on MSNBC and obviously what's transpiring here in the UK. And it feels like we've come to this point where there is no accountability, where you can sort of say anything to a politician and there's no pushback. And it's almost like it's been calculated. We have now sort of government who's saying effectively that, yes, we recognise that people who genuinely are asylum seekers won't be able to use the asylum system in the UK, but we don't care. And people in the UK are almost accepting it. And I'm wondering, have we gotten to this point where, the gotcha moments, they're trying to make them see that they're actually making a mistake, doesn't really matter anymore because there seems to be ends justify the means.
It's a great question.
Way of looking at it.
It's a great question. I totally see where you're coming from. And I say this on my show. I say, how do you shame the shameless? In the old days, you could shame a politician. How do you shame shameless people who don't care? And I say, look, don't give up. One of the reasons I wrote this book was because I saw the degradation of the public square, of our public spaces, of our media by some figures, especially on the right. And I wanted to equip people with the ability to do what you just said, which is call them out, hold them to account, even if they try and dodge and evade. The ordinary citizen should be able to do it. The journalist should be able to do it. Politicians should be able to do it. I firmly believe still, in the power of debate, the power of rhetoric, the ability to persuade people, change hearts and minds. It's getting harder and harder, I know, but I'm not giving up.
Well, I love that you're still such an enthusiast. It's been a great hour, Mehdi. I think everyone's enjoyed it. Thank you very much indeed. Go out and order or buy Mehdi's book, Win Every Argument, The Art of Debating, Persuading and Public Speaking. It's published by Macmillan in hardback at £20.
Thank you so much. I loved it.
Now we're going to sort of switch gears over the next hour. I can hardly believe I'm saying this, but Mystic Meg has died. She has left the mortal coil. Why do we take such note of astrology?